And our focus was around what we called alternative commodities. So that was effectively, so it included industrial hemp, effectively legal cannabis, it included avocados, limes. We were even pushing on a Bitcoin contract. We were pushing on events-based contracts.
Wait, so you just woke up one morning and you were like, hey, I would love to trade avocados on a futures market?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. The US is really interesting from like there's a lot of nicheness in this space. There's a lot of politics that goes into it. So actually, there's very few things that are illegal in the United States to build contracts on. Actually, one of them is onions. So it's illegal to build an onions contract.
Hey everyone, welcome to Founders in Arms podcast with me, Immad, Akhund, co-founder and CEO of Mercury.
And I'm Rajat Suri, co-founder of Lima and Tribe. Happy New Year, everyone. It's 2025. This is our first podcast of the year. Immad, how was your holidays?
Yeah, they were good. I managed to stay in San Francisco for most of them. Went to Tahoe for a few days, but it was actually nice to be not traveling. I did a six-week sabbatical over the summer last year, so I feel like traveled out, and it was good to just be here. Although my heating stopped working at home, so it was freezing for a lot of it.
Wow.
How about you?
Yeah, I had a good holiday. I was took the kids and wife to Costa Rica for a week.
I love Costa Rica. Was it nice and warm?
It was super nice and warm. It was 90s during the day and 70s during the night. So really beautiful weather and really beautiful country, like very modern. I thought and great support for like English and even US dollars.
Yeah, the food's really good there as well. I love it.
Yeah. Easy to get around. It feels like a country made for tourism. It's like one of these things like kind of ideal for tourism, which I didn't really expect would be there in Central America. In the middle of like, Nicaragua and Honduras and some of these countries you hear horror stories about, because of like unstable government. But turns out Costa Rica doesn't even have a military. That's how stable it is. It doesn't feel like it needs an army.
Yeah, I wonder, there's like a weird quirk about Costa Rica where it's almost all European as well, right? There was, I think sadly they just killed all the indigenous people there or something like that. Like it's very different from the rest of Central America.
Yeah. I think it also helps being near Panama, which is in the news these days because it's, the U.S. wants to take it back or at least the canal. It's a truly beautiful country. I recommend everyone going. They're adding more direct flights from SF next year or this year in 2025. So
oh, really?
It's actually,
last time I went, I don't think there was a direct flight. You took a direct flight?
Yeah, there's only one a week. There's only one a week. So I flew in on the one direct and came back on the same, flight.
Which day is it?
It was Saturday. It comes back on Sunday.
Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah.
From United.
Yeah, that's always one. When I moved to San Francisco, I was always like, I'll go to Central and South America all the time, but it takes forever to get there. It's like never a direct flight, and it's super tricky.
It is, and it's super east. It doesn't feel like it's going to be like that east, but you're basically flying east most of the time.
Yeah.
So
we thought it would be nice to do a kind of personal chat, talk about predictions for 2025 before we fire into our guest, which is Edward, and we're going to talk about crypto. So let's start with that. I guess before we get into predictions, like what are your kind of personal and business goals for 2025, Raj?
Yeah. So, another big year. I think, I'm running two different things these days, Lima and Tribe. We don't really talk about it much. Actually, we're always talking about our guests. But Lima has actually been very relevant over the holiday period, right? We're helping high-skilled immigrants come to the U.S. And, it really...
Oh, God, I forgot about this whole India H-1B debate over Christmas.
Yeah. I mean, my phone was blowing up. It was crazy, to see that, like Elon, like kind of take on the MAGA, restrictionist, right? Which, I didn't really expect that.
I mean, I'm really glad that, like, I actually think the worst aspect of the worst potential aspect, at least from my perspective, is immigration of kind of Trump's potential presidency. Last time he was in power, they kind of paused H-1Bs for, I think, a year and a half, which is very disruptive to a lot of people and tech companies especially. Yeah. But like real human lives are affected by this stuff. It's like people set up plans and like now they can't move, etc. So I'm glad that Elon came in very pro high skilled immigration, and Trump kind of backed him up as well. Was that the take from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I work directly with these immigrants now. Like I spend some time with them and get a chance to really know their lives, and and my goal is to help them, right? Like Lima is really focused on helping immigrants, talented immigrants, live their American dreams, and it is truly heartbreaking stories. And these people have already been approved for a green card, right? Like 10 years ago, and they're like, I'm talking about like director levels at like Meta. And like, people who are like, pretty senior, very experienced, maybe former founders. Some of them are founders. And, they're trapped because of like, our immigration system is really backwards and actually is discriminatory against Indians and Chinese in particular, because there's extremely long wait times to get a green card. What happens with these folks is like they actually have kids who are going to age out of the process. So like, even though they've been approved for a green card, their kids cannot get a green card after they hit a certain age. It's like 21, and so they, basically their kids are getting too old. So the kids will have to go through their own 15
So what's
year
the solution?
whatever.
Like, there's just no solution.
Oh no, we try to get them into a different category of green cards, which is a little bit faster. Like
That's kind of funny because like you think Biden and Democrats would be, would be better about immigration, but they didn't really fix these things either.
So that's a misconception. I think, the Biden team has helped on the margins. Like they've helped with like making O1s easier. You might hear about O1 visas. Many founders are getting O1 visas now. A lot of YC founders who are coming from, overseas are getting O1s. And Biden made it much easier to get O1s. So for entrepreneurs, actually, Biden has been very helpful. But they can't change the laws. So some of these things are actually built into the statutes, and you need congressional will to get this done. And the whole immigration debate, like everyone will tell you, especially, I would say on the Republican side, but even some Democrats, we cannot change anything about the immigration laws until we fix the border, right? And so the border has really held this whole thing up, right? And even if you look at what Trump is looking to pass, like his first priority is going to be like border law, right? Like it's going to be more focused on border law. The truth is that like of the 1.6 million immigrants that came into the country last year, I think that was the stat, like only 100 or 200,000 were skilled immigrants. Like it's still a drop in the bucket compared to like.
But only those were legal immigrants as well, right? Like everyone else basically walked across. Yeah.
And all the attention goes to the illegal immigrants.
Yeah. So what are your big aims for Lima this year?
So we grew a lot last year. We're helping hundreds of immigrants now. We hope to get to thousands this year. It's one of the fastest growing things I've ever worked on, in terms of like helping, impact and helping people. It's very gratifying to be able to get people approved.
So is it like kind of a services-based legal side, or you're helping with technology there?
It's really services. It's really like a high touch service. And that's something I've never done before, which is like a service type of business. But we're not like doing AI. We're not doing anything there. We're just helping people. Like, and people need help. I mean, being an immigrant is very lonely. It's very personal, right? Because it's your own status on the line. And I believe what's right for this space is like a very high touch personal. So it's a concierge service is kind of the way we describe it. And we just help people solve problems. The other thing about Lima is that I believe that there's an opportunity for an organization to really be responsible for bringing in the best talent into the U.S. So there's no one's job in the U.S. government to bring in talent. Like there is your job at Lima is, you probably see part of your job is to bring in the best talent. Your job at Mercury is to bring in the best talent to Mercury. And I felt my job as
honestly,
CEO
it's too hard to bring in international talent. Like we don't try that often. I guess we don't have like a super specialized need like AI or something like that. But it's true. Yeah, there should be someone trying to bring the best people to the US. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no department of talent in the U.S., right? So it's like we almost have an HR team, but not a talent team or a recruiting team. So like at
hardly even
level.
an HR team.
Yeah. Basically, people are trying to block people from coming, but not people from attracting. And I think that there's an opportunity, to have an organization that's really focused on talent for the United States at large. And so we've started doing this, and our goal is to actually build offices worldwide to scout talent and bring them to the U.S. And actually compete, for talent globally, and so bring in the best,
Are you going to work
Russian
with
scientists,
companies
for
as
example.
well? Are you going to be like, hey, like Meta, who do you need? And we'll go find the talent, or?
Yeah, but we're talent first. So I think it's almost going to be like a talent agency from that perspective. Like we're going to be like representing the talent, and then we'll work with employers.
No, that's a cool
to
mission. I
connect
like it.
Yeah, yeah. So probably you and I haven't even talked about it, in detail. But that's kind of, it's a long-term thing. I mean, I believe, Lima is going to be around until I die. I think it's going to be like it's a long-term thing. I really believe in immigration. I believe in bringing the best people to the U.S. So, and then Tribe is something completely different. It's like a next generation group chat app, which we haven't talked about publicly really much at all. It's I believe group chats are one of the most delightful online online interactions you could possibly have. I think it's quite different from like Twitter and like, even Instagram. It's not performative. It feels a lot more authentic. You and I are in a lot of group chats. We've had some of the best conversations of my life. I've been on these group chats, and some of the best relationships I've built are through group chats.
Yeah. It's also kind of a callback to the early internet. Like I grew up on IRC and like, it's basically group chats online. And they kind of died out with kind of the initial wave of social media.
Totally. Yeah. And there's something about like a private group chat, that's focused on a specific interest of yours. It's like a dinner party that's, kind of divorced from like time and space, because like normally you go to a dinner party, it's at a certain time, it's at a certain, place. But when you have a group chat on your phone, you can talk to them anytime in any place. And so you're free from constraints. And that means is that you can actually build relationships with people over time, which actually builds a lot of trust. And I think you can build some great relationships. So I personally have like 20 or 30 different group chats I'm part of, right? And I feel like it's really helped me like learn a lot more about my interest and also meet a lot of great people. And so I want to build the best possible group chat experience out there. And, if we can do that, I think people will enjoy it. I think people will feel more actualized as people, and get the chance to meet more people and build good, trusting relationships with them. So it's very experimental. It's very new. I still think we're very early on this group chat adoption thing, even though it's kind of hit the zeitgeist recently. You see a lot more like media coverage on group chats these days, but I still think we're very early. So it's one of the things that's another 10-year type of thing. So
yeah,
but,
I think the hardest thing with group chat is discoverability, right? Like I'm only in the group chats that I guess like close friends are creating. It'll be interesting to kind of is that a major focus of yours, discoverability?
On Tribe, you can discover group chats right now. You can there's a way to search, and we have a small library. I think over time it'll be much bigger. I actually believe group chats are better when they're smaller, though. So I don't believe in these hundreds of people in a group chat or even thousands. Like I actually believe a small intimate group chat, like less than 50.
You know what's kind of interesting, and it's tricky to do. No one's pulled it off. Is there was this cool app called Backchannel that I was invited to, and basically what this team did is it's all done off test flight. So it's not launched on the App Store, and there's a different test flight with a different Black channel for like 80 founders at a time. So there's 3 or 4 of these, but you only have 80 people, and it's fully anonymous, but there's only 80 people in there. I thought that was kind of smart because it's like you can basically like fractally fork out and have like 50 of these, and it's just 80 people at a time. And it never has the problem of like being like too big.
Yeah. Being too big is a real problem, for group chats. It's kind of like it can't be too small, it can't be too big. I still think there's a lot of interesting ideas out there in consumer social, and like I think VCs have given up on it way too early. But I understand why they have, because like there's only been like a very few big successes in this space. But I think there'll be a lot of medium successes as well. So we'll see how things go, because the market size is just way bigger than when you and I started our careers. So yeah, those are 2 big professional things, and then I think from personal perspective, my kids are turning 4 and 6 this year. So it's great to, kind of entering that I already can feel it. We're entering that kind of a promised land, or of like kids' ages. And you can tell, like, it's like the kids are super fun to hang out with these days. This doesn't feel like a lot of work. It feels like, you're actually having really good quality time with them. And I probably have this until like they're teenagers, but it's only limited time. I mean, I realize that. So how about you? Tell me about your personal goals and professional goals for this year.
I guess you started with business first. So our big goal this year with Mercury is to expand outside startups. So, we really dominate the startup banking space, especially post SVB. which is a great space to be in. It'll still be our main focus. But most people don't realize it's, that's only about 27% of our customers. So we're pretty big in kind of e-commerce and professional services and real estate. But it's all of that growth has been pretty incidental. I wouldn't say accidental, but it's not been a major focus. So next year we really want to, this year we want to make it an actual focus. So how do we grow? I think the 3 places we want to grow is e-commerce, professional services, and personal banking. So all 3 of those, in terms of volume, much bigger markets than startups. And the fun thing in banking and fintech is like any niche sounding market is probably like a $10 billion idea. So there's a lot we can do there, and we're kind of just early innings there, especially personal banking. Do you use Mercury Personal yet?
I love it.
Oh, yeah,
it's
you
become my
do.
main bank. I switched away from like Bank of America
nice.
and whatever else I use.
Yeah, same
Way
for
better.
me. It's such a nice experience. So
It
I
makes
think
so
there's
many
a
things
ton
easier.
to do there.
And like one of the things I love about it is like transfers are so easy. With Mercury, and like you guys have really gone the extra mile on getting that right, and that's a big headache. And like if any legacy bank, I hate it. I hate working with like Bank of America or any other bank. I mean, they're not that good. So Mercury's really nailed that.
Or searching for something. I don't know why banks make it so hard to search. When I started Mercury, I was like, there must be a law. There must be a law that makes it so hard to search. Because, like if you go past 3 months normally, you have to go through PDFs to find things. There's no law about that. You would think there was a law because it's so consistently a problem at every bank. But it's this.
You guys pay good interest rates too, right? Like that's another thing. It's like you have really good financials as well.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about those things at Mercury. I mean, there's a ton of other things happening as well. So it's kind of funny when like Mercury is now an 800-person company. So it used to be the case where you could just have one focus and you're like, this is what we're going to do in the next 6 months. But now it's like, okay, well, that's one of the 50 things we're doing.
You're actually running multiple companies widhin the company. I like you're basically, these are different like business units.
Yeah, basically. I mean, even each product, fintech is really hard, which you'll see more from Edward later in the podcast. But even each product, like we do last year we were working with and we were rolling out more kind of lines of credit. Sorry, not lines, letters of, I guess lines of credit. So giving e-commerce companies like some cash flow. And it's a pain. Like you have to have a whole underwriting engine for that. You have to go get licensing in every state for lending. There's just so much to do. And it's a small-ish line item for us, but it's definitely like a whole startup worth of work, a whole complicated startup worth of work just to like provide an extra financial services feature. But yeah, it also makes it fun though. Like I feel like one of the reasons I started Mercury is I feel like most startups, once you do that one thing, you then spend a lot of time kind of scaling that one thing. It's like, oh, now I'm doing better sales and marketing, or like now I'm building like, I don't know, enterprise Okta features or something like that. Whereas with Mercury, there's just so many complex kind of startups within it that you can build over time that at least it's like, I like that 0 to 1 motion. I think it's like kind of fun.
Yeah. I love to see that as well from Mercury. All the new products you keep coming out with, the product launches, it's great. Because you're right, it's a big space. There's a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of like, dinosaurs in the space that need to be disrupted. So it's for me as a user, I'm very excited, to see all everything you guys are doing. Are you excited for the next 4 years, in a more deregulated environment?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I mean, I don't expect it to change that much, right? There's I think there's some spaces that have like a little bit more direct, the president changes, the administration changes, and then everything changes underneath. Whereas in banking, there's so many regulators and these are big organizations. There's the FDIC, there's the Fed, there's the OCC, there's the CFPB. So any change from the top is going to be fairly diffuse. And there's generally bipartisan support and stopping money laundering to Russia or like whatever, right? There's a reason all of these kind of regulations and laws exist. So I expect it's gonna be a little easier, but I don't think it's gonna be like instantly dramatically different. And one thing that people I think don't see from the outside is I guess like 2018 to 2021 was kind of like a massive boom time in fintech, and in general it was quite easy at that point, right? And that was over both Trump and Biden's kind of regulations. So the pendulum kind of swings where it's like, oh, we didn't regulate the stuff, and now like some crazy stuff happened. Like there was BlockFi, there was FTX, there was SVB's failure, there's this kind of more recent Synapse issues. So to some extent we're like in a situation where the pendulum's maybe swung too far towards kind of oversight, but it's not going to be like an instant swing back either. Like a lot of these things haven't been like fully baked in, and all the regulations and guidance and all that is not done. So anyway, that's on the business front. On the personal front, I'm actually having another baby in March, so that's going to be. I have a 7 and 13-year-old, so that'll be disruptive. The exact opposite of what Raj is going to feel this year. And my big thing this year is I'm trying to reduce my body fat percentage. I've got 28% right now, so I'm trying to get it down to 12% is my aim.
Wow.
That might be unrealistically low.
What's your strategy for that? Like just eat less, work out more?
Yeah, it's mostly diet. I think it's very hard to work out enough to make a dent on these things. Like if you do like one hour of like very extreme exercise every day, maybe you can, but generally eating less is the way. I'm the main thing I'm doing is skipping dinners. I feel like not just skipping dinners, but like basically like doing intermittent fasting, only having like a little bit of protein in the evening. I just find I snack a lot, especially with kids' food around. There's just always something to
I know. Yeah.
Something to
I
eat.
love kids' food,
Yeah, it's tasty. That's why the kids like it too. Yeah. All right. Let's see. What is your biggest kind of tech innovation prediction for 2025?
Yeah, I'll answer that. One last point on your thing.
Yeah.
It's really hard to control your diet with like young kids, with newborns. I find like my diet went out the window when I had kids, like, so because your sleep
I'm pretty
cycle
good with rules. Like if I have a rule that's like, hey, I'm just not eating anything but like a protein shake from like 3 p.m. onwards. Okay. I'm pretty good at doing that. If I have any ambiguity, if it's like, oh, I'll just eat less, then I don't follow that.
Yeah. I will say though, if you have a newborn and they're like disrupted sleep cycles, it's a bit harder,
Well, I have a night nanny, so I'm hoping my sleep is going to be beautiful.
Okay.
But let's see.
You're an experienced dad at this point, but with kids, the nannies don't solve all the problems.
Of course.
But anyways, okay, yeah. So what was your question again?
We're talking about tech trends. What is your most anticipated tech trend of 2025?
Exciting year for tech. Obviously, I'm working in consumer AI. I'm really bullish on consumer AI. Like, I think there's a lot more AI applications for consumer that people have not yet discovered or not yet implemented. So I actually predict we'll see a lot more interesting consumer AI applications. There's obviously a big, trend in vertical AI and like B2B AI. I mean, most of YC companies are still.
Well, what's a consumer AI application that like
what we saw in the last year was like character AI and like these types of like ways for consumers to interact with AI. So we haven't really seen AI agents really become a consumer application so far. Like, one of the things that bother me the most is like booking travel. Like, I hate booking travel. It's really complicated still. And like, there should be an AI agent that just books travel for you. Like you just give it some specifications.
Yeah, because your preference is almost always the same. It's like, hey, don't make me wake up at 6 a.m. Don't do this. Like, okay, but it's weird how hard it is.
So I'm really excited for people to nail these like very basic things in their life, like or like applications that nail these very basic things in your life. Even for like, hey, you're having a newborn, so an AI agent should actually be ready for you at every given stage. Hey, the newborn's turning 1 month old. They'll probably need these things. Have you bought them? Like, all these basics like help you guide you through stuff that are very predictable in your life, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it'll happen this year, but it should. AI is ready for it. Like the technology is there. So it just needs the entrepreneurs to go in and deliver that stuff. One of the immigrants we're helping is like working on like, AI music, an AI music app where like, obviously you can generate music, but it can help you like, refine your own tastes in music. There just could be a lot more stuff. Spotify Wrapped last year had a really cool AI podcast where like it actually, they generated a full AI podcast based on your own, what you listened to that year. So it was really interesting listening to a podcast based on your own music interests.
But Google has this cool podcast thing as well, where you like kind of shove a document into it and then it generates a podcast out of it.
Yeah, they use the same technology. It was it was Notebook LM, right?
Yeah,
I think it's So, but it's super cool to see that, and you and I may have started seeing some cool AI videos, like some fully AI generated movies with a human script. And I believe we'll
they
see
still
a lot more
suck, but I hope they do improve. There's definitely the power of human potential of like, someone sitting at home and generating like a full movie. I think that we're not there yet, but that will be really cool.
But a TikTok video, right? Like a lot of fun TikTok videos. I've started enjoying TikTok AI videos.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I've seen a few
like
of them
the entertaining
now
or the educational?
entertaining, like one simple like simple video that I've started to see a lot of TikTok is like basically like kings and queens from different countries, so, and they just generate like what a king and queen from like a different country could look like. And it has some cool music and it's just like short clips, right? Like a bunch of short clips. It's just interesting to see that. And then I've started seeing like AI clips for like historical events. That's also cool to see, like what they interpret, like, the birth of Jesus Christ to look like, or something like that, or like, like there's just there's a lot more stuff that can be done, and like AI video is getting much better. So I'm excited for that from the AI perspective. I'm excited for the movement forward in robotics. I still feel like we haven't hit that ChatGPT moment in robotics. Funny enough, that's exactly what Jensen Huang at the CES keynote this week talked about, is like, we're ready for the ChatGPT moment in robotics.
Well, Fatma and I had an interesting use case. Like, we kind of want to get a dog just from like a security perspective. But my 7-year-old is allergic to dogs. And now they're making these like dogs you can buy. Dogs, like, what's the company? It starts with A. It's a Chinese company. But anyway, they're selling this dog for like $1,600. It doesn't quite have all the security features, but you can imagine like recognize someone, have some voice control to say like, hey, calm down, or like, be able to like hear a noise and start barking. Like, there's no reason robots can't do all of that. And even better, like they can call the police. Right?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think those types of things are also less like high stakes and, less like sort of product. You need much smaller product spec than like a humanoid robot, right? The humanoid robot may take many years to get to, but a robotic dog, will be much easier to get to. So I'm excited for that trend. What do you think? And what are your tech trends for this year?
I think the consumer AI stuff is still like a year or two away, but I think AI bringing efficiency to B2B processes is here, right? Like we've had basically a year and a half of people developing kind of CS agents, like document validation tools, SDR agents. There's just a ton of things that happen that involve humans in like back office spaces. And I think Mercury is relatively efficient and like has a lot of technology, but there's still, we have like 120 people in kind of risk ops and compliance and things like that. So there's just a ton of places where humans are doing things that could be done much faster, much more efficiently, automatically. And I think basically AI is there. So you're seeing this everywhere. I mean, obviously fintech is one space. I know tons of like companies that are selling to lawyers, to doctors, to therapists, to there's a company I've talked about before. They basically like half the time a doctor spends is not with the patient. They like have to write up notes. They have to like do summaries. They have to like send it off and to get a pharmacist to like do something. So like if you imagine, in the most extreme case, like maybe you can get 70% efficiency, but let's just say on average you end up with 10% efficiency. But it's today, right? Like you could get a 10% efficiency across like large industries. And like that kind of productivity boom would be huge in America, but everywhere really. Like if you think about, and the reason the 1990s was so good is because of productivity boom due to the internet and computers kind of being fully distributed. But I would find it hard to imagine we can't get like 5 to 10% consistently for the next kind of 3 or 4 years through kind of AI spreading through knowledge and service work. And, ideally robotics too, but we're probably a little further away from like having kind of GDP level effects from robotics. But I really think like this kind of AI efficiency like is today. Like we are here and we're going to like, it's going to get into mass adoption this year, I think.
At Mercury or even personal life, like are you using any of like AI tools consistently beyond ChatGPT or anything like that so far? Or are you writing your own AI tools?
One fun thing at Mercury is like we're using it everywhere. Like
ChatGPT or what are you using?
No, there's like a bunch of specialized tools.
Okay.
So I'll give one specific use case. Let's say you're doing a new landing site, right? There's just a lot of rules about what you can and can't say when it's a financial service, right? You can't make claims about, we have the best interest rate in the world. Like there's a lot of like things that like, maybe you could get away with saying in a non-regulated space, but, and that's like an obvious one, but there's lots of subtle things that you can't say, or like every time we mention banking, we always have a disclaimer saying banking services provided by X. So you can imagine like every single time there needs to be a new change to any of the landing pages, we previously had a human look at the new change and say, okay, this is good or not good. Now it's like an AI will do the first pass. But the cool thing was like, I didn't even know we were using it. And someone pitched me, they were like, oh, are you using this thing? And then I went and talked to the compliance team and they're like, oh no, we're not using that, but we're using this AI tool to do this. But it's like that across like tons of different things. Like it's not, people sometimes think about it as like, oh, you're going to replace every compliance worker with this. But I think at least right now, the more powerful things are like take very specific use cases and like, how do you make AI do the work that a human was doing? But do it automatically and do it like, and like probably better, right? Like you can probably train the AI to spot like, some niche law in Nevada that is to do with financial services that like, a human would have a hard time like making sure they encapsulate. So there's lots of these kind of little things we're doing across like everything we do.
So you are using a bunch of AI startups, it sounds like an AI tool.
Yeah.
Not really like...
I mean, we sometimes, there's a little bit of like just hit OpenAI to go do something. But from our perspective and like maybe the generalized things will get good enough over time, but the specialized stuff is specialized, right? Like, and it's, and rather than us working to like figure out all the ways we could train a model or fine tune it and worry about all the edge cases, like I'd rather just, we would rather just use an AI startup or some other company that does it.
Cool. That's great. Yeah. I think, so you're already seeing that in your business and you're doing you're solving different problems. So you're probably, at the cutting edge of what's going on there. So it's going to be a big, one thing we haven't talked about is like you have a big investment, you do a lot of investing too. So is that one of your big thesis for investing?
Yeah. I mean, AI has definitely been like the trend to invest in for the last 2 years. But it's interesting, like what you end up investing in AI changes every 6 months. So maybe a year and a half ago, it was still kind of more deep infrastructure stuff. Like there's like eval services or like foundation models, or there was like how do you make an AI browse the internet? Like there's a bunch of like infrastructure stuff. Eventually like most of the obvious things are like overfunded kind of thing. And then you kind of have to move on. I think this style of thing kind of basically like fine-tuned AI for like specific use cases. I think there'll still be more of that. I don't know if it's like the most interesting thing to invest in today for a pre-seed seed investor, which is what I am. Like that was probably the most interesting like 6 to 12 months ago. I still think like these AI agents are interesting and there's a lot of different ones you can do. So that's a good space. And then I think just B2B apps that are enabled via AI, right? Like it's still like a B2B SaaS app or something like that. But it's just like massively juiced up because of AI. And there's a bunch of people working on that in lots of different spaces. But yeah, I just spoke to one yesterday. That's like, I guess I shouldn't go that deep into it, but yeah, you can imagine there's all of this like unstructured data that's around with businesses, and like how do you kind of suck that in, make structured data, and like give people insights, workflows, all of these things on top of it. Like a business is full of like PDFs. Anything to do with like a PDF or an email, like how do you turn that into structured data is like a powerful use case.
Do you have goals for your fund too? Like, do you have a certain number of investments you want to make this year or something like that? Or
yeah, I mean, yeah, I've fairly consistently made like 20 to 30 investments a year. That's kind of the target for this year. And yeah, mostly seed, pre-seed, and yeah. It's such a fun way to learn about interesting ideas and startups. So that's really like the main reason I do it.
Yeah, and you can source great opportunities just from what your company is using. Your company.
Yeah, that's true too.
Says something is good.
Yeah, or like, you see problems within the company as well. It's like, oh, I wish someone would solve this. And that can drive interesting thesis as well.
Well, we should stop talking about ourselves for a bit and then invite our guest, Edward Woodford, who is the founder of ZeroHash. Welcome to the show, Edward.
Yeah, thanks for having me, gents.
He's also a fellow Brit, but you live in Chicago, right?
Yes, fellow Brit, been here for about 10 years now. And yes, in Chicago.
What was your kind of entrepreneurial path and how did you end up in Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, Chicago sometimes is seen as a little bit of a flyover city, but I love it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But came to the States, did my graduate degree at MIT, founded a business, did that for 2 years, learned some good lessons. We were able to exit, small return, but it was a regulated business. And so it really taught me the tough lesson that regulation is a necessary condition for success as opposed to a sufficient condition for success. And so it really inspired me to build my next business, ZeroHash, which is an infrastructure business, right? Which allows you to so-called fail fast. It's very hard to fail fast in fintech. And so that experience led me onto ZeroHash, which I founded in 2017 and have been building that ever since.
What was your previous regulated business?
It was called Seed, and it was a regulated commodities market with the CFTC. And our focus was around what we called alternative commodities. So that was effectively, so it included industrial hemp, effectively legal cannabis, it included avocados, limes. We were even pushing on a Bitcoin contract. We were pushing on events-based contracts.
Wait, so you just woke up one morning and you were like, hey, I would love to trade avocados on a futures market?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. The US is really interesting from like there's a lot of nicheness in this space. There's a lot of politics that goes into it. So actually, there's very few things that are illegal in the United States to build contracts on. Actually, one of them is onions. So it's illegal to build an onions contract. There's a reason why chicken contracts don't exist, because people hedge out chicken risk by just basically hedging out corn and wheat. People just see chickens as whatever they eat. And so I got really, really fascinated on this. And I realized that
why are onions illegal?
Somebody cornered the market in the 1950s, and they effectively said, we will make this illegal. Same thing with movie theater receipts. If you believe it or not, Dodd-Frank made it illegal to create a futures contract on a movie theater receipt because Hollywood didn't want it. So I love this kind of nicheness. And ultimately, what we were doing was probably overly niche. We were probably 10 years too early in terms of the adoption of our core markets. But we got regulated. We sold the regulated entity onto a group called Tasty Trade, which then built the small exchange leveraging our infrastructure. And so, it did go somewhere, but it wasn't the VC success story that you want to talk about, so to speak.
And ZeroHash, I mean, maybe I'll butcher the explanation, but you guys are building like an API to do stable coins and other crypto things as well, or just stable coins? No,
both. So we provide infrastructure for both crypto and stable coins. So we solve two problems for our partners. One is licensing and regulation. We're regulated in the US in every single state. We're regulated in Europe, Brazil, Bermuda, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all over the world. And we provide an ability for people to launch a crypto and stablecoin product very simply and easily. Secondly is the technical complexity, especially in stablecoins. People don't necessarily understand this, but if I want to send you a stablecoin, we now have multiple stablecoins, such as RLUSD, USDT, USDC, and then it's even more fragmented in that it's multi-chain. So USDC now is built on 15 different chains. Our focus is on allowing account-to-account transfers of stablecoins, so abstracting away the complexity of different stablecoins and different chains so that customers don't need to think about that. Some examples that we've launched, in the last 6 months are, for example, account funding. So if you've heard of Kalshi, one of the largest events-based contract marketplaces, we allow you to fund and redeem real-time using USDC. Similar story with remittances with groups like Felix Pago, payouts. If you're a freelancer around the world, paying somebody in the Philippines or in Brazil with stablecoins, we power that with groups like Stripe. And then tokenization rails as well. So groups like Securitize and Republic and Franklin Templeton all leverage our infrastructure to access 24/7, 365, the movement of value that is stablecoins. And then, of course, we service more traditional crypto brokerage-like products. And that includes groups like Interactive Brokers. Effectively, Coinbase out of the box is how you can see that kind of crypto as a service part of the business.
Got it. There was this $1 billion acquisition by Stripe for Bridge, right? Was that a competitor of yours, or is that different space?
Yeah, I think in some ways that they are. They're significantly smaller than us from a revenue perspective, and so I think it was a great mark for us, and clearly has garnered a lot of attention and interest in the stablecoin space that we've been building in since 2017. So yeah, I think the stablecoin story is evolving. I outlined some of the use cases that we see. It's going to continue to scale and evolve. I think traditional acquirers and processors will move into the space, traditional brokerage platforms. And our goal is, we power, for example, today Stripe in some use cases that Bridge doesn't offer, and I don't think will.
How did you? What's your kind of psychology as a founder when you see like a smaller competitor get acquired for a lot? Like, are you like, oh, nice, they're out of the space? Or you're like, oh my God, now Stripe's in the space? Like, how do you kind of view that change? Yeah,
look, for me, I think I've become a lot better at managing your emotions, right? Like, especially in this space of crypto and stable coins. We've known each other for a couple of years now. And since we've known each other, we've gone through maybe 3 or 4 cycles of hype and fear, right? And so
don't look at the market too much.
Exactly. So if you let those things impact you too much, I always say the hardest thing, and there's a trade-off, right? The hardest thing in building a startup, and I think especially in a startup in a space that even has these kind of like, they're electrified even more than building a normal startup. You've got to narrow your emotional bounds. You cannot become overly fearful when FTX happens. You can't become overly bullish when this Stripe stuff happens as well. The reality is that you've got to try and narrow those emotional bounds. The hard thing is just not becoming unfeeling, right? Because you narrow your emotional bounds so much that you forget to celebrate some of the successes, and you sometimes can forget to empathize when this noise does impact other people on the team. So for me, what it does for us, we already power some of Stripe's competitors like Shift4 and Nuve. I think other groups are going to accelerate into this space. And so those groups, in some ways, really, Bridge was a competitor in that narrow lane of what we do. I think that positions us incredibly strongly there. But yeah, look, it's a great mark. The interest from VCs is always a little latent to the reality. And so, it creates a good mark for us.
Edward, one question I have, I'm coming at this from like somewhat of a, less sophisticated perspective, but maybe some of our listeners also will have this, less prior knowledge. Well, there seems to be momentum in the stablecoin space of crypto. Why? What's happening? Why is this valuable? Would you describe Bitcoin as a stablecoin?
No. So a stablecoin is effectively a tokenized representation of a dollar. So sometimes I break this down by 3 levels, right? So there's blockchains, and then there's assets on top of blockchains, and then there's accounts. So blockchains are, for example, Ethereum, Aptos, Sui, the Bitcoin network.
Yep.
And people have built on top either native assets. So for example, on the ETH blockchain, there is a native token that is Ethereum, but you can also build other assets on top. And some people are tokenizing, for example, tokenized money market funds such as BUIDL, and which is BlackRock's tokenized money fund. And then there's also, for example, a tokenized representation of a dollar. And that is what a stable coin ultimately is. And then the third layer is accounts. So I want to send Raj a stable coin. Right now, I need to consider it is the same, or if you don't use ZeroHash effectively, you need to consider, is this the same stable coin? And is it on the same chain? Because if I'm sending you USDC on Solana and you have a wallet for USDC ETH, guess what? It doesn't work. So that's why the technological infrastructure that we offer is helpful. To your question as to what's changed, stable coins have existed for a long time. My personal view of what's changed in the last 12 months is the infrastructure around stable coins and what I call the core banking, the core account structure. So where clients have their money today. So in the last year, groups like Nubank in Brazil with 100 million clients have offered stable coins. Revolut now offers stable coins. Robinhood now offers stable coins. PayPal now offers stable coins. So that's effectively close to 1 billion people now have access to a stable coin through their core infrastructure. And so that allows me to use it much easily. I'm not a big believer that most people should hold stable coins as a store of value. Why, right? You miss out on interest. There's all these other reasons. But as a mechanism for transfer, very little can compete with it as a cross-border mechanism of transfer. And so that's what's ultimately changed is that, for example, if you want to trade on Kalshi on Sunday night, previously you couldn't do that. You'd actually have to wait for an ACH to be pulled, and you'd miss the ability to trade on the election on this Tuesday. If you have an account at PayPal, or you have an account at Revolut, or you have an account at Nubank, you can effectively convert that into USDC real time and send that on chain and fund your account real time. So that for me is what's changed, is that the infrastructure has become so much broader. And now you can build these applications on top, almost like people use the analogy of the iPhone, the distribution of the iPhone allowed for the App Store to be created. I kind of view the equivalent of the app, the iPhone distribution is the same technology distribution that has existed in USDC and USDT and others over the last 12 to 18 months.
Okay, I think I understand. So it's basically a faster conversion mechanism or a faster trading mechanism, basically, especially cross-border.
It's a faster transfer mechanism of a dollar representation, exactly.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, and that can be valuable for companies like Stripe because they do a lot of transactions, right? Is that what they're primarily using it for?
Yeah. Let's use like Immad's business as a great example, right? You, for example, have freelancers and people that you need to pay globally. A lot of people, one, can't accept a dollar. They don't have a dollar bank account. And then secondly, even if they do, my assistant is in the Philippines, for example, and we use a traditional payroll provider to pay her. She's not been paid on time over the last 3 months. It's almost impossible, the number of hops that you have to go through. And so we now use stablecoins to pay her, and she then does the local last mile into Filipino peso herself. So that's a great example of the power of stablecoins, is that it's a mechanism to transfer dollar representation 24/7, 365 to anybody that has a phone. That's ultimately what it means.
Yeah, no, I can see that. That's powerful. And banks, bank transfers internationally are so complicated, and they often go badly. So I can see why probably Immad is very interested in this technology.
Yeah, the SWIFT international payment systems suck. It's like, to send money from like a US bank to the Philippines, there might be 3 or 4 banks in between. And this stuff is not like on a chain. This is like the way this money is being sent is by files. Like you send a file to a bank, the bank acknowledges a file it might not even acknowledge it might just go in some ether. There are some like cool improvements to Swift that do let you track it every hop, but even those haven't been adopted by internationally. I mean, like you can just imagine, like the US has 6,000 banks. I don't know how many banks in the Philippines, and there's maybe a bunch of banks in between. All of this like massive coordination effort is just like very tricky. So USDC definitely like solves that just by overlaying a technology on top of it. I think it's pretty powerful. The trickiest part, and like part of the reason why Mercury does not support stablecoins, and Edward and I have talked about this, is there's a lot you get in terms of when you're sending something to Swift, you have to have someone's name, you have to have someone's address. You can do sanctions checks, you can do money laundering, kind of activity, transaction monitoring, etc. How do you address that question, Edward, when someone's like, hey, like, how do you make sure that you're compliant with kind of BSA, AML, and all these other kind of laws around money movement when you just have like an Ether address?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is stablecoins are one of the most tracked mechanisms globally. It's completely all on chain and all public. We have a lot of responsibilities. For example, every time we send a transaction above a certain amount, we have to report on the travel rule. And that means that we're sharing the name of the person that is sending the funds and to whom with the recipient on the other side, the other centralized platform. Also, I think it's really important that with stablecoins, the issuers can lock stablecoins. So they can simply say, no, you've used this stablecoin for nefarious activities, that gets locked down. If you actually look at the stats around stablecoins as a whole.
Wait, when you say lockdown, let's say like, I don't know, some government find out that a stablecoin was used for drugs. Now the issuer can say we will no longer let you redeem this stablecoin for
it's actually
USD.
It's effectively cancelled on chain. Yeah, so effectively USDT.
But then if I just have a Ether address like on my local machine and someone sends me USDC, how do I know it's not like locked USDC or like real USDC?
Yeah, look, with any control, there's always this kind of friction between autonomy and that. So there is a risk with that. But, I think Tether has announced that they've locked over $100 million of USDT in the last month or two. So this is a tool that is used consistently. I think it's just pertinent to note that ZeroHash is like highly regulated. We're regulated in every single state. We're regulated by.
All right, so let's just finish this. So USDC is not necessarily fungible. Then, like, if I receive a USDC, I have to go check. Like, is this still a safe USDC?
It's not that you have to check. I mean, if it can be transferred, it is. I haven't looked into the exact lock-in function, but it's all public source code that you can look at. And effectively now, any stablecoin issuer has an ability to lock assets. It's called like a lock function on a stablecoin. I'm just giving. And
is there not like good enough mixers? I guess for people listening, mixing is like when you shove a bunch of coins from a bunch of different sources and then you kind of release them to separate wallets, and it becomes confused where everything came from.
Yeah, so we're going to go down a rabbit hole of whether technology in and of itself should be regulated, and there's been a lot of interesting court cases in the US around the concept of mixers. The reality is that if an entity uses a mixer, those assets are tagged, and no group will accept those assets. So the beauty of the stablecoin is that I can see every single hop since inception. So if that hop has gone through a mixer, we won't accept those assets. Those assets will be locked on our side. So much of this, the transparency that is created by stablecoins actually makes it a very inefficient way to move money, especially for bad purposes.
How can you reject accepting something? Like if you have an address, you can't stop someone sending you something.
So I think maybe it's important to take a step back. There's a difference between a platform like ZeroHash, which is a centralized regulated platform, and a self-custodial address. So I think you're alluding to the fact that with a self-custodial address where the private keys are stored on your phone, for example, that is a very different complexity. So we do have the ability for our partners now to say that they will only send and receive to other centralized platforms that also are on the travel rule, that are effectively travel rule compliant. And that gives a lot of comfort to regulated platforms. So what that means is it's very similar to like a plaid of, like, I don't want to go into too much detail, but say, for example, you're looking to send funds. And let's say Mercury said, hey, we want to make sure that those funds do not go to self-custodial addresses. What we do is we effectively force that client to log into a centralized platform, link their account, link their address, and those funds will only be sent to that address, and we can name validate. So in that instance, it creates some friction. It's certainly a step that some people don't like in terms of what stable coins were some purposes of stable coins, which is effectively to give less power to governments in some people's mind. But these are solved problems now by ZeroHash, and we create a lot of flexibility for groups that do have these concerns. But again, if you look at the data from groups like Chain Analysis, there is a lot less. If you actually look at the stats, there's very, very, very little bad actors done on stable coins relative to, for example, physical cash, relative to, for example, checks, relative to, for example, some banks around the world. So I think it's always important to compare what is the actual data showing, and it's incredibly transparent.
So one question I have for Edward is, how does the stablecoin industry, and also what you're working on, how does it change in the new regulatory environment going forward? Obviously, we're about 10 days away from an inauguration here. Is that something that is a kind of tailwind for you in a more friendly record? I'm guessing it'd be a huge tailwind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we spent a lot of time in DC, and I'm going to DC just before the inauguration. It's funny, DC has now become not only a political hub, it seems, but also a business hub. But I would bifurcate stables versus crypto from a regulatory perspective. Stables being tokenized dollars or tokenized euros. In the US, there is very large bipartisan support around stablecoin acceptance in the US.
Already, even in the Biden administration. That was...
before. To some degree, even on crypto. So there's a couple of things. I think one of the challenges for the crypto industry is to say, what do we want, right? There's a lot of talk and a lot of hype, but what do we want? I can tell you what we think is needed. But there's a couple of things that have happened. So over the last few years, there's been this instance of regulation by implication. And what I mean by that is effectively governmental agencies saying, if you do something which is completely legal, we will make your life a misery. And that's what's happened repeatedly. So, for example, they created a rule, the SEC created an accounting bulletin, incredibly nuanced, an accounting bulletin called SARB 121, which basically dissuaded any publicly traded firm, dissuaded any regulated broker-dealer from trying to offer a crypto service. They did the same thing to banks, and Coinbase has done a huge amount of work collecting information from the FDIC. I wrote a blog on X around the debanking experiences that we faced. It was to the degree that a bank was sponsoring an event that an award that I had won, and I got an email the night before saying you can't come to the event because they're paying for your meal. It was that extreme. That's how scared banks were of servicing the crypto and stablecoin space. Just to be clear, we're incredibly well banked, now, and we've remained banked, but there was this regulation by implication. And I think that's one of the big things that will change at this point is the change.
Is this what was called choke point 2.0, or is
Correct.
This okay?
Correct. And that got a lot of interest on X. David Sachs tweeted about it. Just to be clear on banking side, and you'll know this better than anyone, is banks could make risk determinations themselves. Hey, we don't want to accept a certain risk profile. But what was happening, and what is ultimately where people get confused about debanking, and I've had discussions with people say debanking wasn't real. Operation Choke Point 2.0 wasn't real. The point of Operation Choke Point 2.0 was effectively saying this industry in of itself, we deem to be super risky and you should not bank it. That is not the way that banking works, and actually explicitly against the OCC guidance as to how banking should work in terms of risk assessments, in terms of those decisions.
That's remarkable, yeah. And so, I can imagine seeing the end of that would be a big relief to you. And I certainly understand that these agencies sometimes feel like they can take the law into their own hands and interpret that and use their investigation powers to stop whatever they believe is something that shouldn't exist. So that can make life very difficult for entrepreneurs.
And that's what people call regulation by enforcement, right? That is, effectively enforcing or subpoenaing or Wells noticing people. Regulation by implication is a lot more subtle, but it actually is incredibly effective. And I gave you two examples of SARB 121 and letters sent by the FDIC. And you've always started to see this, to your question, Raj. In the last few weeks, there's been multiple articles about bank holding companies that have brokerage businesses like Charles Schwab and Morgan Stanley E-Trade. Both have either publicly stated or it's been reported that both of those entities are now looking at supporting a crypto product. And that is fundamentally because of the confidence in the overturn of SARB 121, which was not a law, was not a rule, it was an accounting bulletin. And then secondly, the perception of the Fed and other regulatory agencies. Again, we're not espousing no regulation. We're espousing very clear regulation, enforcement of that regulation, as opposed to using ambiguous, regulation by enforcement is effectively not based on law, not providing guidance, just enforcing. And regulation by implication is a term that I've coined, is this softer power that can be used.
Edward, you said you're going to DC. We've only been very lightly involved with kind of policy work at Mercury. It sounds like you've done more. I guess, like, how would you kind of, if you were talking to another entrepreneur, like, would you advise, hey, get involved in DC early? Or I think, a few years ago, it was mostly like ignore DC until you're like freaking huge kind of thing. So how do you think about it? And if someone did feel it was important, they're in a regulated industry, what would you advise them in terms of like what they should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say I definitely don't have the secret approach that has it all figured out. I think the best piece of
in deep with the deep state.
Well, I mean, you could probably tell, right? Like, I've lived here in the US for a long time, but my accent gives away I'm not from here, which sometimes has its benefits and sometimes has its cons. And so I do bring along my American colleagues to a lot of these meetings. But I think the key point that's being said to me is that if you aren't in the conversation, the risk is that you're just forgotten. And so often rulemaking is made without consideration of your use case. So, for example, ZeroHash is a B2B2C business. The rules that need to be made need to consider those sorts of B2B2C businesses, right? I am more skeptical of associations personally, just given my experience. I think associations are only valuable when there's a huge existential threat to the whole industry and everyone can coalesce. Otherwise, they become incredibly political. The sell,
I do want to hear the rest of what you think, but the sell to me, unlike we are part of actually two associations, I think the sell to me with associations, which made sense, is a politician that like goes and listens to Edward might be seen as like someone that's like, biasing towards one particular company and listening to them. Whereas if a politician goes and listens to like the trade association for stable coins, then they're just listening to constituents and they're listening to the industry as a whole. So I think there is like some power to like associations in that sense, right?
You're spot on. But I would say that you're probably a big member of that association. The problem with associations, I would say to earlier stage founders, is you are a smaller voice. And so the association will speak for the industry, but not necessarily your interests.
And you might even be competing with most of like you might be disrupting the people in the association. Right?
Exactly. The experiences that I've had, look, the big four accounting firms, it's so funny. I've spoken to multiple lobbyists and they say they always get what they want. And the reason is that the four accounting firms effectively come together and they say the same thing all together. And so exactly your point, the challenges for an industry is where a politician hears one thing from one person and something different from another person. It's very hard to understand the noise around these places. But I think it's for us, it's been an education process.
So coming back to this original thing, associations don't work. What does work?
I wouldn't say associations don't work. I would just say that you've got to be cautious. But I would say what works is creating relationships with staffers.
How do you do that? Like using lobbyists, or what's the practical?
Yeah, we've engaged lobbyists. We only engaged lobbyists in the last year. You say I'm naive, but I do think if you come to good ideas at the table in a low ego approach, accept what the industry needs to do better, and build that trusted relationship, you can build pretty organic relationships with relatively with senior people. Of course, American politics is one that money does talk to some degree, from events and donations and PACs, and that is something also to be aware of.
Have you engaged in like PACs and things like that, or avoid it?
So as I'm not a permanent I'm not a
you're
US
not a citizen
so it creates more complexities about myself giving funds. But there's a lot of rules around PACs. Yes, I mean, as a business, we and as an executive team, we do engage a little bit in that process.
Raj, have you done anything on immigration and pursuing kind of DC?
Yeah. I'm pretty involved in immigration stuff. So I actually know exactly what you're talking about, talking to staffers and like actually Congress people and even the agencies. I just talked to someone from USCIS a few days ago.
Like, do you just cold email them, or what are you doing, Raj?
I mean, I have built relationships over time, so I know people now who are actually like ended up becoming pretty senior, in these in the federal agencies. And actually, the number of people who care about like improving legal immigration is relatively like small, so everyone knows each other, and so it's like it's a bit different, I would say, that than probably what you guys are doing, but there's actually a lot of immigration stuff happening right now, and there's so that's a whole separate topic, and like there's like something that's happening in the new bills that are being put out, like we could talk about that separately. But what are you talking about in terms of like building relationship with staffers? Is like what I've heard is like the go-to move, and the go-to move is you build a relationship with like the chief of staff of like Congress people, and like or like their senior team, and they bring ideas to like the Congress people. Yeah. And often it's like the people who are on the committees that you want to target, because a lot of the laws are made in committees. Yeah. So yeah.
I think that the biggest things for me that I've learned is most of these politicians are continuously fundraising. They have 9 to 15 fundraising events a week. A lot of them are just on autopilot.
9 to 15 per week? Like yes. The year before elections, or
all the time.
Wow.
All the time. And that's so these people, a lot of the time, they don't even control their schedules. So they're turning up. And so you've got to be, for me, it's one is saying, being very precise with your message, being somewhat engaging, because these people are bouncing around, being wheeled out to different events, flying around on the 5 a.m. flight to DC to come to Chicago for a fundraising breakfast. Just imagine your mindset if you're that person. So it's got to be very precise, very clear, and memorable. And that's sometimes where, being the English accent in the room, and Immad, I know that you've had these advantages as well, sometimes people just remember you for that reason. And so I think it's just understanding the psyche, to Raj's point, that the staffer is the one who goes often very, very deep into a problem, and figuring out which staffer is passionate about that problem and being a resource and sending information, not selling. It's information. It's not selling.
That's super interesting. There's some interesting parallels with VCs as well. VCs are doing like 15 meetings a day, and it's very easy for them to lose attention and not be engaged in like your particular pitch, even though it's the most important thing to you.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the advice that you once gave me on VCs, which was one of the best advice that I received in terms of just talking to VCs.
What did I say?
you said to me when you talked, feel free to edit this out, but you said to me once, when you talk to VCs, treat it as your marketing time. It's not necessary. You're not going to get this massive eureka strategic moment, and don't go in trying to get a strategic moment from VCs. You are you are marketing. It is they're the mouthpieces in the industry. So just treat it as your marketing time. And as soon as you said that to me, honestly, this isn't tooting your horn, I just got less frustrated in those meetings. And so you approach it very differently. This is my marketing time. This is my schmoozing time. Same thing with regulators. It's your schmoozing time. It's your time to be very precise, very content. But there's not going to be this big eureka moment. It's more of a slow burn.
Yeah. And to be clear, that's like for businesses like Mercury and ZeroHash, that makes sense. Like when you're selling to other portfolio companies, when you're selling to tech companies, it makes sense. It might not make sense to someone who's not selling to that space. But yeah, I do remember that conversation.
One way I always thought about those meetings is like it's just practicing your pitch, or practicing the way you talk about it, and thinking about like how to make it simpler. So every time you do it, you're like trying to think, how can I make this better? So just like practicing with an audience, right?
I think the other way that also helps, which is I feel like it's kind of the opposite advice to marketing, is like, most of these VCs are pretty smart and interesting people. They're around other interesting ideas and people. So I think it's kind of fun to just like have a conversation and like learn from them. And they're not going to have necessarily like a deep knowledge about your particular business, but they do know a lot about a lot of different things. They have like a perspective that's very broad. So you can like just learn from them and have an interesting conversation and come in with that mindset as well.
They have their ear to the ground, so that they know what's happening around the industry and what other companies are doing. So they may have like actual information about like another company in the space. So that can be valuable.
Yeah. Last piece of advice on DC, and it may be a little trite, is try your suit on before you go, or try your formal wear. It is
do you always wear a suit?
In DC, I think if you're not wearing a suit in DC, you'll look. I don't wear a tie, and I that's kind of dressed down. And it's still the only place in the world where I'm asked for business cards and where I wear a suit.
What do you think would happen if you didn't show up with a suit on? Like they would just not take you seriously?
I think given the space that we're in, which is crypto, and given the look of SBF and others, where there was this mindset of being intentionally scruffy.
You're not showing up with your crazy hair and sandals.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is still an element of old school-esque. And don't give people a read. Like, people are very quick and emotional to make a read on you. Just wear the bloody suit.
Yeah. I think there's an element of respect as well. I think it's like, you're not treating the institution with respect.
Of course.
Yeah. I've noticed like how different like the culture is in DC, right? Like it's having interface with people. I mean, people really go in 4-year cycles there, right? Like and even people's jobs, like everyone. Yeah, like they're used to these cycles, so it can feel like a very temporary place too. Like because like a lot of the people are there just for these 4 years, and they know that, right? And they're like, I'll be, and they don't know actually before the election, they don't even know if they're going to be out or not. So there is this feeling of like. So
if you're a staffer and you're going to lose your job after 4 years, what do you do? Just go to industry, or is there like is there a set of jobs for Democratic staffers that like kick in?
It's going to be like a lot of these staffers, I think, in Democrat, like, they're going to go to things like climate, consultancies or things like that. Like, there's going to be, I think, many of them will end up in consulting. I think in some form of consulting, like McKinsey consulting or something like that. Yeah,
I would say the time cycle is even shorter than 4 years, because effectively, if you're a congressman, your term is 2 years, and then even for a presidential election. You're ramping up for fundraising, and also kind of people have already moved on, and the House and the Senate have also changed. And so, the conversations that we're having is that the next 18 months is really the critical period of a 4-year term. Wow. Everyone knows that Trump can't. Well, assuming Trump isn't going to rerun, you effectively almost become lame duck in 18 to 24 months, which is terrifying. So you're absolutely right, Raj. The velocity of change can play to your benefit if there's a change in your path, but also those relationships have to be consistently built on both sides of the aisle, because it is such a quick evolving space, even shorter than the very short terms that Congress people already have, and that's why they're continuously raising money.
Is this healthy or unhealthy? I mean, for the U.S. system, I guess like there's an element to the U.S. system where like you're supposed to not get much done in politics, right? Like that's part of the system. It's supposed to be like slow and hard to get things done. So maybe that's healthy, but it seems bad that there's like very little long-term kind of planning and thinking with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reality of that. I mean, people have their views on money. But the Supreme Court has decreed that money for a company is freedom of speech, and so that is how people view it.
Yeah, I think. I mean, look, it's generally worked okay. Of course, there are problems with the system, but there's. Things get done in the U.S., right? And we did find that, during COVID, when there was emergencies, like people got stuff done, right? Like there was relief passed and all these things. So I think, during normal times, it moves slowly. During like crisis times, it can move fast, So, in general, like, U.S. law, I mean, there's so many gaps in U.S. laws. I mean, immigration is a prime example of like a problem that's been there since the founding of the country that still isn't that good, So like, it's like 250 years in, and we're still not like in a great place on immigration. So crypto is just getting started and stuff. So you have another 250 years to go.
Yeah.
Before we end this, Edward, any predictions on Bitcoin prices or other crypto prices by the end of 2025?
I think the sign of the success of this industry is that it's somewhat unbundled from the price of Bitcoin alone. But my personal view, that is not investment advice, I think it will go up. I'm a long-term bull on Bitcoin. I'm a long-term bull. But I do think that the success of this is viewing this as technology that somewhat becomes decoupled from the conversation around price.
Yeah. I mean, that's 100% true about stablecoins. And, I kind of think, at least maybe this is a simplification, but there's like the best two use cases for crypto so far have been kind of store of wealth, like Bitcoin just being gold, and stablecoins. Like those are, in my opinion, the two best like real use cases that are like at scale and working. One thing that I struggle with on Bitcoin prices, I don't know if you have a different view on this, is, gold is not that big. It's like 10 trillion, right? Bitcoin's already at like 2.5. Don't quote me on this. I think gold prices did go up, so maybe it's 15 trillion now. But like sometimes people are like, oh my God, Bitcoin's going to be worth like 5x more than gold. And they say it's like, but like that feels unrealistic. Like what are your thoughts on, like, do you think gold is the cap? Do you think it can be worth a lot more than gold?
I mean, I think we're still very early in the innings, right? I mean, we've only just launched an ETF in the last 12 months. I think, I mentioned two of the largest brokerage firms in the US starting to adopt this in terms of their portfolio. Fidelity has changed their advice that, people should have, an certain of their funds, 3% of holdings in Bitcoin. But again, I think that is one part of the story, to your point, around store of value. The other part is utility and transfer. And so some of the key metrics is how much value is being transferred on these cryptographic networks. And Bitcoin is one of those networks. And we're seeing a massive increase, for example, in tokenization, the growth of, groups like Figure that have tokenized mortgages, groups like Republic that have tokenized sports clubs, groups like Securitize that have tokenized BlackRock's fund, which is an ability to transfer a yield-bearing instrument on chain. So that's the metric I care about more.
That doesn't necessarily help Bitcoin prices, but I guess it would help the crypto industry as well.
It's somewhat intertwined, because the more utility, the more demand there is for the underlying instrument that is the incentive mechanism for the transfer on a decentralized network.
Yeah. Really great having you on, Edward. Thanks for exploring all these topics.
The tough questions.
We don't want to make it easy.
I like it.
But this was fun. I think it was interesting to kind of dive in on the government stuff. Like, I don't feel like most people kind of think or talk about that enough. But your kind of experience in regulated industry is probably like the most extreme. And maybe a benefit of actually being in Chicago. I think like people in Silicon Valley are so far from DC that they like I'm probably like more scared of it.
Yeah, although now a lot of the SF people are going to push up the prices in DC.
So all VCs there.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it, Raj. Nice to meet you as well.
Great to meet you. Yeah.